Hey, Damon here for Automotive Superstore. On this video, the top 5 things you need to know to buy the perfect set of full range speakers for your car. Let's do it. Tip number 1, work out what speakers actually fit inside your car and what kind of speakers you've got. Have you got component speakers with a separate tweeter in the front and the rear potentially? Or is yours an older car and you have dual cone or full range speakers that have a coaxial mount speaker in the car, front and rear? And if you've got that, is it worthwhile upgrading to a component set? Second to that is actually what's going to fit physically inside the car, not just the diameter, but also the depth. And so you don't want to have a situation where you put a speaker in that's larger than your factory one, and when you wind the glass down, it hits the speaker. When it comes down, you can't open or close your window properly. So to do that, it may take you removing a door trim from your car, a rear door trim, front door trim, an A-pillar trim to check your tweeters, or even a rear quarter panel in a coupe, because a lot of speakers are mounted there or under parcel shelves. For that, a trusty flat edge like that put across the opening of the door, and then use a tape measure to measure in, wind the window down and see how much mounting depth you've got. And then when you go and look at the speakers that we sell, they'll come in the specifications with the mounting depth from this back face here to the back of the magnet to tell you that you've got enough mounting depth compared to what's in your car. Another thing to think about is the tweeter aperture. What I mean by that is entry-level tweeters are smaller, like this one here from Alpine. It's a nice 19mm tweeter. It'll fit pretty much anywhere you need to put it. It'll fit in virtually any factory tweeter mounting location quite happily. And the little holes that are in your aperture that the tweeter fires through, this will fire through that. It's a nice small 19mm tweeter. As we step up in price through these speakers here, you'll see right at the top end here, it's a much more expensive tweeter. It's a much more high-end sounding tweeter, but it's a much larger diameter tweeter. This one's 28mm compared to 19, and you might not actually physically be able to fit this behind the grille without smothering a lot of its output. You need to think about that when you're choosing your component set and decide, do I really want to keep a small tweeter behind the stock aperture and suffer the consequences of a potentially smaller, not as good sounding speaker, or am I willing to invest time in custom installing a nice big pair of tweeters to get the payoff in sound quality? Now the same rule applies for the passive crossover. Here are 4 different passive crossovers from 4 different suppliers, from affordable through to high end. You can see here this Alpine crossover for the small tweeter. It's a very small, nice little compact one with inline fly leads, nice and easy to install. It's going to fit anywhere pretty much. As we step up though, we get into larger and larger crossovers like say this one from Focal. It's going to be a bit more challenging to fit this somewhere behind a door trim than something like this or this. Thing is, the larger the crossover, the higher the quality it is and the greater the sound quality you will get. And so again, that's a trade-off about what you can fit in the car versus the sound quality that you're after. The last thing to think about is DIN and not DIN. So what is DIN to start with? Well, here's a good example. This is a Selwyn Vega mid-range driver, and you can see here, just like with the coaxial from the same series, they have lots of mounting holes, different variations, different hole locations, and these are pressed steel frames that are shallow and easy to fit. These are designed as a drop-in fitment to virtually any car. The good news about that is this is specified as a 165mm diameter driver, and yet so is this, and it's a much bigger, burlier cast frame. The interesting part is, because of the intelligent design they have with these little mounts around the outside, this will happily fit in a 165mm mounting flange, as will the Focal. Happy days. The other thing to think about though is a model number on a speaker is not necessarily indicative of the actual size. This Focal is called a PS165, it's in the model number. If I measure it from the outside to the outside, it is indeed 165mm. No problem. This speaker here from another manufacturer, it's called an MW162, and so you'd think, well, 162mm, right? But if I measure it from the outside to the outside, it's 172mm, and so it's not going to fit in some of these types of mounting rings. And so you need to double, triple check all of the specifications on the speakers you're choosing to make sure they're going to fit in your application. So tip number 2, spend your budget wisely. What do I mean by that? Well, most people, they're going to be pondering, well, I've got to buy a pair of speakers for the front of the car and then another pair of speakers for the rear of the car because people sit in the back or I've got kids or whatever. Let you know a secret. They don't care. The kids don't care, and your passengers, honestly, they don't care. Most of the time, you're probably in the car by yourself listening to the music you want to listen to, right? Not what they want to listen to. And so be selfish, spend the money on you in the front of the car. So take your budget for the rear speakers and the front speakers, put them together and buy one really great pair of speakers for the front of the car. There's another really good reason why you should do that. As we jump up from price points between $200 and $300 into $400, $500, $600, the actual leaps in build quality and sound quality are immense. They're huge. But when you go from $700 or $800 to $1,000 or more, it becomes incremental gains. What that really means is there's a sweet spot where there are some amazing sounding speakers, and that's actually between about $500 and $700. So if you can afford to buy in there, that's where I recommend you buy. Tip number 3, by all means, ignore power ratings of speakers. They're virtually worthless, and I can say in my 30 plus years of buying car audio and consuming car audio, never once have I ever worried about the power rating of a speaker, and it was never a governance or an indicator of the quality of the speaker or its sound quality or even how loud it will play. The fact of the matter is, the power comes from the amplifier, not from the speaker. It's like your car. Did you buy tires with a horsepower rating on them? No, you don't. Now, you'd be an idiot to have a big high horsepower car and not have grippy large tires on it. It's the same thing, you wouldn't have a big powerful amplifier and a very small speaker. But the power output of the speaker is not a governance of the volume capability of that speaker necessarily. So ignore power ratings of speakers completely. They're a waste of time, they're misleading and flat out lies a lot of the time. Here's another thing to think of, and this is true across many popular car audio manufacturers, certainly the mainstream brands. Take the peak power rating of their coaxial systems, and look, here's one now from Kenwood. So this 4-way 6x9, on the back it says, peak power rating, 600 watts. RMS power rating, which is the amount of power it can handle continuously, 115 watts RMS. The funny thing is, if I actually scan Kenwood's amplifiers, the ones they sell to power their speakers, the most powerful amplifier they sell only makes about 70 to 75 watts RMS into a 4-ohm load. So that's a bit of a weird disconnect, and that's kind of the same across a bunch of different brands. They use power ratings on speakers to fool the people who are inexperienced in buying to think that's a better speaker because it's got a bigger number. It's not true. So just ignore power ratings. One thing that is sort of meaningful though is when you're looking at matching speakers to amplifiers, don't worry about the 2-ohm per channel rating of a full range amplifier, because virtually all speakers, apart from a handful from Morel and Helix, are 4-ohm impedance, no matter whether they're a single speaker or a component set, or they're a 2-way coaxial or a 4-way coaxial. But Damon, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 4-ohm speakers, and 4 ohms in parallel is 1 ohm. No, that's not how it works with this arrangement. What happens is, here's your component set. This is a 4-ohm speaker, this is a 4-ohm speaker. The crossover sends the high frequencies to here and the mid-range frequencies to here. So the amplifier only sees the tweeter in its band of frequencies, 4 ohms, and only sees the mid-range in its band of frequencies, 4 ohms. Generally speaking, that's how it works. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a 4-way coaxial like this or a 2-way component like this that's still a 6x9 but it's got 2 parts. It's still a 4-ohm nominal load through the frequency band that the amplifier is looking at. So don't worry about 2-ohm power ratings for the channels that are driving your main speakers. Your main speakers are 4 ohms. That's the power you're going to get out of the amplifier. Now tip number 4. It's really important to know what kind and quality of speakers are in your car so that when you buy a new set, you're actually going to get an upgrade. I've got a couple of examples here that's going to highlight that for you. So my Audi TT that I've been doing as a project on our YouTube channel that you might see, these are the factory speakers out of them. It's an 8-inch mid-range driver, and it's teamed with a huge 30mm soft dome tweeter. Now, they sounded okay, but just not as good as I require from my sound system in my car. But a couple of weird things there. So 8-inch, well, that's a bit weird. It's not very many 8-inch component sets to replace that with. Plus, while an 8-inch is really good at mid-bass, it's very poor at mid-range. It's kind of true to say that as a speaker gets smaller, it gets better at higher frequencies, and as it gets larger, it gets better at playing lower frequencies. And so, even though this is an 8-inch mid-range driver factory, I replaced it with a 6.5-inch so that I could improve the mid-range clarity at the sacrifice of a little bit of mid-bass and to have, frankly, a wider choice of speakers to choose from. The other thing to think about is the crossovers. That's the one area that OEMs always skimp on. So see on the back of this tweeter here, there's this little cylinder just here. That's the crossover. What's the high pass filter to take away low bass information from this tweeter? It's very rudimentary. It's only first order or 6 dB per octave, where when you buy an aftermarket speaker set, as I said before, the crossover improves as you get higher in price, and that allows the speaker to perform better and keep it in a narrower band of frequencies so it sounds better and handles more power. And so it was really important that I not only changed the speakers, but I improved the crossover. It's one of the areas that the OEMs really suffer for. The mid-range driver, for example, has no filtering at all. And that means it's trying to play high frequencies, and it doesn't sound good doing that. On the other end of the scale, you've got examples that I've got here. So have a look at this. This is a mid-range driver from a component set that retails for around $1,500. They're very, very high-end, very highly regarded. And have a look at this mid-range driver. Seem familiar? But this was from a Volvo. That's what it was from, Volvo. This is the OEM upgrade that someone paid for in their Volvo to get an upgrade speaker system from factory that's very similar based on this component set. And so if you've already got this level of speaker in your car, you're going to find it challenging to find an upgrade. So it's important to know what kind of speakers in your car, if you've got an upgrade, what they are, so that you know that when you spend your money on an aftermarket speaker set, it's going to be a legitimate improvement. And now tip number 5. Think about the actual installation itself, what other parts you're going to need, and where certain parts of your installation are going to have to happen. So, for example, the crossover box. Very small one on the Alpine set here, and as you go up in grade and quality, they get bigger and bigger till they can get to very large indeed. Where's that going to go? Can it fit behind your door trim? If your tweeter's in your door, that's the place for it. But if your tweeter's in the dashboard or A-pillar, it's going to have to go somewhere else. Think about that and the size of it, where it's going to fit. You may need to pick up some extra speaker cable to make that work. On speaker cable, for the most part, you can get away with the stuff that comes in the packaging. It's an area that, unless you actually need extra length, like a custom installation, the factory speaker cable running from the source unit to the doors, for example, it's a bit of a pain to change, and so just leave it. The factory speaker wire will be fine, and if you've got enough quality speakers or speaker wire in the kit that you've purchased, just use that. There's no need to upgrade that to something thicker gauge. You're better off spending that money on better speakers, for example. Next up are mounts. So your mid-range obviously is going to go in the door somewhere, and AirPro. They sell a whole host of these adapter kits that the speaker will mount into and will mount to the door to replace the one that comes out. Punch your car's rego into our website and it'll do a short list of the rings that sit your car. It's always a bit of a clue to tell you what size fits in your car anyway, so that's nice and handy. Besides that, think about sound deadening. So this is one of the brands we sell. This is Stinger Roadkill. This is a mat. It's got an asphalt based material in there with a sticky back on here and this front here, and you apply this to the outer door skin of your car on the inside, the inner door skin, and my recommendation is the back of the door trims. because they're just a plastic panel that can resonate, and you can actually hear that inside the car, especially when you've got decent sized speakers in the front doors. You can hear those vibrating. You can feel it on your arm when the music's playing. You can feel the vibrations through the skin of the door trim itself. So place this on those areas. It'll dampen those resonances and improve the sound quality. So there you go, everything you need to know to buy a great set of full range speakers. Down below you'll find a link that'll take you through to our website where you'll always get a great deal at Automotive Superstore. While you're here, like and subscribe. See you next time.